Good afternoon to everyone on the East Coast. This is Question Authority, and it is the 16th of September, 2021. And we've got a good show lined up for you guys today. So I hope you all enjoy it. And it's been challenging. It's been challenging to do this. I do have a full time job and home and family life, and those things are certainly a priority for me. So this is also very important, and I think getting the message out there about these topics. It is a small group of people that are participating in these kinds of conversations, and I feel privileged to be allowed to do this. And this is a celebration of free speech as much as it is anything else. So, on today's show, the first thing I want to do is catch up on some breaking news. And it looks like we have achieved a small victory. There was a show proposed, a show called The Activist. And it says a competition series hosted by Usher, Julianne Howe, and Priyanka Chopra Jonas, probably mispronouncing their names. It became a target of online activism. How surprising. Now, the problem that we have right now, currently, is that the people that claim to stand up for us, that drape themselves in a revolutionary garb, they use the right words and they say the right things, but their actions speak something very, very different. It's very disappointing. It can be very discouraging to see these kinds of things happen. But then it's also very encouraging to know that even if some of the loudest voices that are out there seem to have all of the power always ultimately it rests within the population. It rests within the people. So the activist is being reconfigured in response to a firestorm of criticism. So they sought to make money by turning activism into a reality TV show, while in reality, real activists are arrested and brutalized by the police when they try to speak out and challenge the US and Western empire. We don't need sanctioned protests and photo ops for congresswomen and congressmen. What we need are grassroots movements that remain true to their ideals. And this appears to be a very, very challenging task. So thank you for everyone who spoke out against this disgusting and terrible idea for a television show to further cheapen movements that this empire seeks to stamp and crush out. See, if you're playing a game, but you control both sides, you can't let people know that you're controlling both sides. You can't let people know that one group is pulling all of the strings. So there we have the kabuki theater. We have the act of resistance on the left, but then the actions and the voting records of these people that claim to be our progressive champions tells a very, very different story. So I want to scroll down, and they tried to defend their idea. They invested a lot of money in this, so they have to get some sort of return. the big pocket backers of this TV show need to get their money back somehow. So it says, although footage of the original incarnation has already been shot, this version of The Activist will be entirely new. So they're rebranding, which is another tactic. The show has faced serious heat since Usher, Howe, and Chopper Jones were announced as hosts last week, with social media users criticizing the competitive nature of the show meant to celebrate activism. How far have we sunk in our society that we raise no stink? Nobody gets mad when protesters are run over by the police in their cars, when protesters are handcuffed and put in prison for using megaphones in the Capitol, at the Capitol, when protesters are beaten and assaulted, non-violent protesters taking advantage of their First Amendment right. And these First Amendment rights are disappearing and they're being undermined from every side and every angle because they are controlling both sides of the game. Our culture is obsessed with entertainment. We are constantly being entertained. There's a very good book, and it's called, I believe, Entertaining Yourself to Death. I didn't pre-prepare it, but I'll put a link in the chat. But moving past this, this is a cause for celebration because they did stop what would have been a further neutering of real activist movements to move them into the mainstream, to make them palatable and entertaining for audiences. And activists do need to get their message out there. But if they're being accepted into the mainstream, while most of these activist cause are anti-establishment, all it does is give people a good feeling. It just makes them feel like they're doing something positive and fighting for change in the world, when actually what they're really doing is just remaining entertained. So they're retooling the competition series and they're making it a documentary special. And here are the replies from the regular people. Eco-socialist musician says, shame it's not dismantled. Saeed Amir says, activism isn't about fighting other activists, it's about fighting a system that exploits us, demeans us, and pushes us to the margins. Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act, and yes, he was a Democrat. And it consolidated media power into a very small group of companies. And these companies are funded by big pharmaceutical. They're funded by the companies that produce all the tools and gadgets for war. And they control, because this is who gives them the money to remain on air, they control their messaging. Whether it's implicitly stated or whether it's just understood that you don't speak out about certain things because the sponsors won't like it. There's an idea out there, it's the fourth estate. It's an idea that was formed from the British Parliament. But as it's understood in this country, the fourth estate is supposed to be the press. It's supposed to be another check and balance on power. But what happens if the press is completely co-opted? What happens is if all of the branches of government are all funded by the same people and they're all controlled by the same people? There is a system that is very powerful, and a big part of it is propaganda. Propaganda to manufacture consent for things like foreign wars and intervention, for things like massive profits for big pharmaceutical companies at the expense of poor people in other countries. And the list goes on and on and on and on. So I responded to this, and I don't know where it is. It's good that everyone is jumping on board. I don't see any positive responses really to what they tried to do. But it is disgusting. So we're going to move right along. And today's episode is titled Performative Activism and the Neutering of Movements. And what better place to start than to go back about 1600 years and take a look at the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, at the end, has a lot of similarities to the United States and the Western Empire today, filled with decadence, mass inequality, military spending trumping all infrastructure. And you can see how easily the military budget is passed by anyone on any side, even the people that claim to be progressive champions. They vote to increase the CIA and the Pentagon budget to finance foreign wars and intervention and to funnel money into the Beltway contractor class. So the Roman Empire fell, as we all know, and this was how they divided their citizenry. At the top, there were the patricians. In the patrician class, this is from History on the Net, the patrician class were descendants of the most ancient and powerful noble families. They were landowners, lived in large houses, and they had political power in the Senate. The patricians married and did business only with people of their own class. Then the majority were the plebeians. And you may have heard this before. You may have heard someone call another person a plebe. So the plebeians were the working class. And I'll read from the article. Plebeians were mainly artisans or peasants who worked the patricians' land. They lived in apartments and they had no political rights. Now you might say, hey, hang on a second. We have political rights in this country. But what happened when a massive amount of people rose up and supported a man named Bernie Sanders? The machine stepped in. Powerful influences stepped in. And why were they so upset? Because he was trying to take some of the power away from the patricians and give it to the plebes. And the patricians are known for their greed and their decadence. High-class Roman citizens would eat their meals and they would vomit into a bucket so they could fill their mouth with more food, while the plebeians worked and toiled and suffered for very little. So plebeians were mainly artisans or peasants who worked the patricians' land. They lived in apartments. They had no political rights. If they were lucky, plebeians could become clients, obedient servants of a patrician family. And you see that with some of our quote-unquote progressive champions on the left. They are lucky now because they can be obedient servants to the establishment while still tricking all of the people who follow them into thinking that they really stand for the plebes. They offered their services in return, received the protection of the head of the patrician family who became their patron. Empires rise and empires fall. So this is from history.com. Government corruption and political instability was one of the reasons for the fall of Rome. If Rome's sheer size made it difficult to govern, ineffective and inconsistent leadership only served to magnify the problem. Being the Roman Empire had always, or the Roman Emperor, had always been a particularly dangerous job. The people at the top they do fight each other. They fight each other for power, and they do stab each other in the back. Just like in the past, so it is now. And if we don't learn history lessons, if we don't look at the past and examine it, we will always make the same mistakes. Civil War thrust the empire into chaos, and more than 20 men took the throne in the span of only 75 years, usually after the murder of their predecessor. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal bodyguards, assassinated and installed new sovereigns at will, and once even auctioned the spot off to the highest bidder. We saw that just recently in California. There's no actual physical murder, but they recall a governor, and then you can buy your way in. They literally auctioned the governorship of California off to the highest bidder. Now, I'm on the East Coast, but I listen a lot to a gentleman named Ron Pacone. Ron Pacone has a podcast called Get Your News On with Ron. And he does a very, very good job of breaking down why he voted not to recall Gavin Newsom. One reason is the Democrats would, if a Republican took power, be able to fundraise massive amounts of money to fight the Republican, just like the boogeyman of Trump allowed Joe Biden to become president. But that's one reason, is they would escape accountability, and then they could blame everything on the Republican. Now, I did some videos on Larry Elder, and Larry Elder is essentially Rush Limbaugh in a different person. Now, I don't like Gavin Newsom. I think he's disgusting. And I think he's part of that neutered left. He is completely co-opted and controlled by powerful influences, but he still has to maintain some kind of respectability amongst the plebeians who want certain things like rights to their water. In California, company Nestle seeks to control all of the rights to water in that state, and Larry Elder would most certainly hand it to them without a fight. So Gavin Newsom now is scared, and he's still there, and he's still cocky, and he's still arrogant. But behind all of that, there is a fear that if he doesn't do something like the things that he promised and make some real progressive change, he'll face a real uphill battle during his re-election campaign. So back to this article, the political rot also extended to the Roman Senate, which failed to temper the excesses of the emperors due to its own widespread corruption and incompetence. As the situation worsened, civic pride waned, and many Roman citizens lost trust in their leadership. So looking back at the fall of the Roman Empire, we see a lot of intersectional points, things like the class divide. Now, this is a funny story, and I'm going to play a video from one of our feckless leaders. So, Honorius, he was the leader of Rome when it fell. And when it fell, he got very, very upset. But he wasn't upset that the city had been sacked and taken over by foreign invaders. He was upset because his favorite chicken, Romus, may have been injured. These people are so lost and out of touch that they care more for their pets than they do for the human beings they're supposed to be there to serve. too many windows open, but we're going to get through them. And I'll just go ahead and search for the video that I was trying to play.
Welcome back. We're here with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and we've asked her to share something from her home for a little late show and tell. Speaker Pelosi, what have you found? What are you going to share with us from your home?
Chocolate.
Really?
Chocolate candy.
Oh, wow.
And this is something you can get through the mail.
Okay.
You never run out. Can I show you?
Me. Yeah, absolutely. This is the episode of Cribs I never knew I needed. Oh my, wow.
Other people in our family go for some other flavors, but chocolate, and then we have some other chocolate here.
See, I've always felt a connection with you, and now I understand why.
During this time, everyone was locked down in their homes, not able to work. Many people were not able to work. Everyone was afraid. Everyone was scared. Everyone needed the government to step in and do something to help them. And this was one of the most tone-deaf things that we saw at that time of fear, at that time when we needed our leadership to step up and help the plebes. Nancy Pelosi, in a show of disgusting decadence, shows off her expensive fridge with her expensive ice cream and her nice little basket of chocolates. We had someone run that claimed to be a progressive champion. Her name was, and still is, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And she embodies this neutered left, this neutered movement, and she's following the playbook of one of her predecessors, and that's the playbook of Barack Obama. We thought we got someone into power that was part of our class, a bartender, a person just working. But if we look back at what some of the plebeians did, if they were lucky, they could become clients or obedient servants of a patrician family. And she is now a client and an obedient servant of the Democratic Party that she ran, seeking to overturn, to shake up, to change from the inside. It has changed her.
Figure out a way where we can govern without special interests getting in the way.
Do you think that the Republicans can move on this issue at all, or is there too much?
Special interests getting in the way.
Do you think that the Republicans can move on this issue at all, or is there too much fossil fuel money in their coffers?
You know, there are some Republicans that are actually in the No PAC caucus, I believe. So I don't think that this is necessarily a left versus right issue. This can be a true issue.
Or is there too much fossil fuel?
And Democratic, independent, everyone agrees.
Hear from
that we've got her back.
So here's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez protesting at Nancy Pelosi's office.
It's showing and pursuing the most progressive energy agenda that this country has ever seen. You know, I think in order for us to move forward, and what Americans are asking, not just of the Democratic Party, but for all members of government, Republican, Democratic, independent, everyone agrees that we need to get big money out of politics, and that the way future is to figure out a way where we can govern without special interests getting in the
One gigantic special interest.
Do you think that the Republicans can move on this issue at all, or is there too much fossil fuel money in their coffers?
You know, there are some Republicans that are actually in the no.
There is a gigantic special interest out there. It's a company called Alphabet Inc. And this is an article from Statistica.com. As tech innovates, the federal government is trying to as well, and in 2015, the United States government funded less than half of all basic research in the country for the first time since World War II. That same year, the Department of Defense started testing out the Defense Innovation Unit to help streamline procurement processes in major tech hubs like Austin, Boston, and Silicon Valley. This is R&D for war. This is R&D for the military-industrial complex. And some of the I can't think of the goddamn word. Some of the usual suspects, there we go, Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, they're still receiving billions of dollars from the Department of Defense. But look who's stepping in. We have Apple, Microsoft, Intel, and Alphabet Inc. That's the company that controls Google. So in 2021 and 2022, who are the top contributors to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's campaign? This political champion who said we need to resist these outside and undue influences. Number 2 on the list, Alphabet Inc. Now, since we're talking about military spending, we need to go to one of our in-prison heroes, a man who stood up against the establishment and is still suffering the consequences. Just like in the Roman Empire, their fear of invasion and their overspending on their military budget caused them to ignore the problems of the people, the problems of the plebeians, and it caused them to crumble from the within and made them vulnerable to attack, even with the largest military force in the world. So 20 years ago, this man tried to sound the alarm.
Because the goal is not to completely subjugate Afghanistan. The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite. That is the goal, i.e. the goal is to have an endless war, not a successful war.
They did not lower the Pentagon budget. They did not lower the military budget after they supposedly withdrew from Afghanistan. They're actually still raising the military budget every time they vote on it. Julian Assange tried to sound the alarm. And of course, our progressive hero would vote against war. Right? Here's who she truly is, standing next to one of the most greedy corporate patricians, Nancy Pelosi, 100 millionaire. And AOC started her campaign protesting in her office, and now she nicknames her Mama Bear and takes money from Alphabet Inc. She's there to suppress a real revolution. She's there to capture the people who wanted to fight for progressive change and pretend to be on your side while stabbing you in the back. She's on Nancy Pelosi's side. She's on the corporate side. She's on the side of her second largest donor this year, Alphabet Inc., who is involved now in massive amounts of R&D for the military industrial complex. So this is from leftvoice.org. In recent news, we learned that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez joined 218 other Democrats to approve a budget bill that includes a record amount of military spending for the next 2 years. Given that AOC has become a symbol of the opposition to Trump and his administration, this surely comes as a surprise. Rashida Tlaib, another outspoken leftist and member of the Democratic Socialists of America, also voted for the bill. The DSA that was very successful in mobilizing the online left, the DSA whose members probably perfectly aligned with me and my views and my opinions and what I would like to see happen in this country, their leadership has been taken over. It needs to be disbanded. The members that actually truly care need to find other places to go, because the DSA will only use progressive sounding language and do performative actions, but not really try and produce any change that challenges the establishment. Where was the DSA for the Medicare for All March? Where was the DSA for Occupy Congress? Where was the DSA for End the Damn Wars? They're online, but on the ground, they're nowhere to be seen because the movement has been captured at the very top and it has been controlled. In the DSA handbook, there was a plan for when there was a small margin in the House or in the Senate, I think, probably both, to force a vote for Medicare for all. Because that issue has all but disappeared from the mainstream conversation. We're building momentum, and the momentum is building and building and building and building. And then these operatives come in, these DC insiders come in, and they, I'm sure, offer their expertise. And of course, people need to know how to accomplish their goals. But they have these spies, essentially, infiltrators, come into their organization and completely neuter it. And neutering is cutting the balls off an animal. It's taking away its fight. It's rendering it passive. And that is what they want. They want to take our movements and make them passive. They want to give us leaders that say all the right things but do nothing to help the people that they represent and serve the establishment, serve the machine. So AOC and Rashida Tlaib both voted for massive spending in war. Julian Assange, he's in prison. AOC is at the Met Gala doing performative activism.
Oh my God! Okay, you go first. You go first. Sandra. One. No. Oh, Sandra. Come on. Okay.
That dress costs $14,000. And they're going to use identity politics to justify their excess, to justify their cringe-worthy fake protests. And they're going to try to escape accountability by hiding behind identity. So they're very quick to mention that the maker of the dress is from a marginalized group. That way, any criticism of this can be called racism, can be called xenophobia, can be called misogynistic. But we're not criticizing their identity, we're criticizing their actions. This gala cost $35,000 a ticket, and I think something like $250,000 a table. These are the patricians. These are the ruling elite. This is the aristocracy. This is the oligarchy. And she is not there to make a statement that causes any meaningful change. She's there to be a gatekeeper to power. She's there to be the wall between real activists and real change.
Well, Aurora is such an incredible designer. She started she started her label right here in New York City with $3,500 in her pocket a few years ago. And we asked, what does it mean to be two working class women showing up to the Met? And so we decided.
So listen to these labels. Working class women. AOC now makes, was it over $100,000 a year? I could look it up, but it's an obscene amount of money for a normal person, for someone who gets to just go around and do late night TV shows and not actually do anything to help us, because you can see from her voting record that she's voting for more war. That is not progressive. And she's also voting to raise the police budget. She cast a vote to raise the police budget by $2 billion, or at least she allowed that vote to go through. I didn't prepare an analysis of that, but if you want to, there are good articles written about how the squad coordinated their vote not to block a bill to raise the Capitol Police budget, because these are people that say Black Lives Matter. These are people that are all for anti-militarized police force movements and protests. But AOC at the Met Gala didn't mention once, just like she didn't mention Occupy Congress, just like she didn't mention End the Damn Wars, just like she didn't mention the Medicare for All marches, she didn't mention the Black Lives Matter protests going on right outside of the street. And either she is completely tone deaf and incompetent, or she knew that it was going on, and because she no longer supports these causes, anything disruptive, because she is now an obedient servant of the patrician class. She says nothing. These are images, and yes, it is from Fox News, which is an organization that I detest. And they publish this because they are only for their side, and anything that makes the left look foolish, they will publish it. We have to criticize these people for a couple of different reasons. One of them is they're the most likely to listen. The other is they are wolves in sheep's clothing. They are pretending to be something that they're not. And because they exist, they can stamp out any real action, because they don't use their massive platforms to grow protest movements, to send people out to things like Occupy Congress, to send people out to things like End the Damn Wars. They're voting for the fucking wars. And she's voting for the police that these Black Lives Matter protesters are being brutalized by in a very expensive dress at a very expensive event, rubbing noses with the oligarchy, because that is the side that she chose. And this is what she did not say anything about. There's a man named Mike Rosado who was killed last month in a police shootout. This is New York City. This is her territory. This is where she is a congresswoman. And she's not mentioning the death of a black man killed by the police. This is what they did. I'm having a problem with my computer. Probably have too many windows open. So we have to be very careful who we choose to support. And we have to understand that politics is just a transactional agreement. A politician promises you something. If they get elected and they fulfill their promise, then we continue to support them. If they promise us something and they get elected and they do the complete opposite, then we should condemn them and we should speak out against them. We should stop donating to them and we should stop voting for them. AOC is not on your side. She's on her side. Let's go back. Then he sits. Oh, deal. You know, why do they matter? Why should someone who's world entire country us and listening to my voice that if you are supporting me is like the floor help this country. We were raised in poverty. They would be there to do that. They're not one else. But I'm saying we're thriving. The money and it got funnel contractor. You have to and sometimes did there. They is just more emotion, more on a team was perfectly accepted. Class playbook. The man that was part of bag of a man paused. He led to to fix it. I think topic. It's not really the best.